Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Yayasan Hasanah Scholars ILMU Circle 2024. I'm Lily Paul, and I'll be your host for today's event. So it is truly an immense delight to see all of you here today in Kravis Hall. And I believe most of the YK scholars here are not strangers to one another. We have come to know one another and grown closer over the past years or months or weeks. And I do see some new faces, people who have come to the States for the first time or New York City for the first time. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. We will chat later over the amazing food at the back. I don't know about you, but I always miss home food, so this is a great opportunity. We are also incredibly encouraged to have our dear scholarship managers, Puan Lina and also Puan Hidayah, joining us today. Every year we get to meet both of you in this faraway land. In my first year here, I was the tour guide for Puan Lina and Puan Intan, and I was their photographer of the day when I brought them sightseeing to like Brooklyn Bridge and Dumbo. And last year I brought them touring around Columbia's main campus. And this year they're coming to a new scenery. They're coming to the business school. And of course, today our dear distinguished panelists for the forum today, we have Puan Siti Kamaria, the Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah, Dr. Amir Rahman, the Senior Fellow at Columbia University, Dr. Anya Sharifin, Director of Tech, Media, and Communications at Columbia University's School of International Public Affairs, Danusha Kachiona Singh, Managing Director at Souls Foundation, Shazad Bhatti, CEO of Axiom Learning, as well as Dr. Aisha Simon, co-founder and Chief Learning Officer at Axiom Learning, who happens to be in town today and has agreed to join us. Welcome all of you, this cute little Malaysian communal gathering. We are very glad to have all of you with us today. And finally, not to forget our participants joining us online as well. There will be Khazanah scholars from other parts of the US, as well as students from other scholarship bodies, dialing in from the UK, Australia, China, and even the UAE. Selamat petang from the States and salam sejahtera. I hope that you are all as excited about the panels today as we are. And so a heads up that the talk today will be recorded and uploaded on the YouTube channels of Yayasan Hasanah and Hasanah. The theme for our forum today is resilient leadership. We have it here, yes. Resilient leadership, sustainable impact. So as we gear up for the discussions today, I'd like you to keep in mind 4 key ideas. Leadership, what that would look like in the career space, organization, and community. Resilience, especially in that leadership role, as well as the career journey. Impact, and sustainability in the impacts that we create. The interconnectivity between these 4 things is increasingly important in our world today, because as we know, effective leadership not only drives organizational success, but also, more importantly, it shapes social and economic policies, especially for marginalized communities. Now, I wonder if this phrase sounds particularly familiar to you. Investing in today's talent for tomorrow's promise. I'm looking at the Khazanah scholars. So in case you haven't already guessed it, that is Yayasan Khazanah's mission. So today, as we as scholars receive and bear the rewards of this mandate, I think it's timely for us to also learn the nuances of wise leadership, how to learn continuously and with humility, how to wield leadership as a tool to address inequality and lift up communities who have historically been left behind, and finally, how to be resilient as we navigate the paths forward. This afternoon, we have an inspiring lineup of speakers who have firsthand experience in leadership that benefit both organizations and communities in fields that range from finance to education, tech, and also social advocacy. And it's my honor today to introduce you to them all. First of all, we have Puan Siti Kamaria Amatsuki, who is the Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah. She has extensive experience in financial leadership and social advocacy. She has led initiatives advancing gender equity, such as the Selangor Gender Mainstreaming Project, and served in leadership roles with PwC, Hasanah National, and the UN. Her work at Yayasan Hasanah focuses on sustainable national development with initiatives in education, community development, and the environment. Siti is also passionate about preserving Malaysia's cultural heritage through her artistic endeavors. Secondly, we have Dr. Amir Rahman, who is the chair of Innate Capital and a professor at the Columbia Business School, specializing in private equity and responsible investments. He has led investments in Islamic finance fintech companies and serves on multiple boards, including banking, investment firms, and private equity-backed companies. With a background from Harvard and Columbia, he teaches leadership in international business and ethical finance. He is also a trustee of various educational institutions promoting economic and business dynamism globally. Thirdly, we have Dr. Anya Shrifin, who is the Director of Technology, Media, and Communications at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. She is an expert on solutions to online misinformation and regularly writes and speaks on generative AI and platform regulation. She has edited several books on investigative reporting in the Global South and continues to examine the role of government and philanthropy in supporting journalism. Dr. Shrivin's work focuses on how media leadership shapes societal narratives and democratic systems. Next, we have Danusha Catriona Singh, who is the Managing Director of Souls Foundation, focusing on career preparedness for low-income and indigenous communities in Malaysia. She's been instrumental in launching programs like Skills Hub and Solar Academy, benefiting over 90,000 individuals and bringing solar power to thousands of homes. Danusha has expanded SOLS through strategic partnerships with HP and Malaysia's Ministry of Youth and Sports. She is preparing to transition into the CEO role and aims to scale SOL's impact across Malaysia. Next, we have Shazad Bati, who is the CEO of Axiom Learning, which provides innovative educational programs for students with learning differences like ADHD and dyslexia. His work extends across 14 US states and includes pro bono initiatives supporting refugees and underprivileged students. With a background in education, renewables, and biotech, Shazad has held leadership roles in investment management and is a recognized Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. He holds degrees from Harvard and Columbia and is an advocate for educational reform. Last but not least, we have Dr. Aisha Simon, who is a Harvard-educated physician and co-founder of Axiom Learning and Doctors Worldwide. Her work has focused on providing medical aid in over 13 countries with partnerships like Mercy Malaysia. Dr. Simon has supported rape survivors after the Bosnian genocide and now chairs the board of the Every Woman Treaty, working to end violence against women. We will have two panel sessions today, which will be moderated by two of our very own YK scholars. First of all, we have Nick Noor Zafira, who is doing her Master of Public Administration at Columbia University. With nearly 8 years of experience working at Shell in KL and The Hague, she has led commercial strategies for energy projects globally, advised on government energy policies, and participated in high-stakes negotiations in complex geopolitical settings. She is also the Director of Women in Energy at the Columbia Energy Association and a Global Energy Fellow, a fellowship program that focuses on training future climate sustainability and energy leaders. Second, we have Charisma Wong, who is pursuing her bachelor's in sociology at the University of Harvard. Born and raised in Sabah, Charisma is a third-year sociology major at Harvard College, passionate about climate justice and urban development. This past summer, she began working alongside Native American communities in Louisiana, assisting tribes in writing federal grants to support climate resilience. As part of Harvard's Urban Sustainability Lab, she works with community organizations to study new models for affordable housing. In her free time, Charisma volunteers with the Boston-based refugee youth, and she also sings. Amazingly, I have had experience with Harvard's Radcliffe Choral Society. Yeah, so everybody please join me in giving a big round of applause for all our speakers and moderators. There will be time for an audience Q&A in each panel, and then we will wrap up with a networking session around 4:15 p.m. over the food at the back, which I'm sure you're all excited to get to. So without further ado, to kick us off today, I would like to welcome Puan Siti Kamaria Amasuki, Managing Director of Yayasan Hasanah, to deliver her opening remarks.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, distinguished speakers, beloved scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. It is really a great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's ILMU Hasanah Forum. And I'd like to thank Prof. Amir Rahman for making today's venue possible. And I think it's something that we want to encourage among the students to network and collaborate and make this happen in the future. This knowledge sharing session, which was introduced in 2017, have become an integral part of our mission at Hasanah, offering a platform of thoughtful discourse learning and the exchange of innovative ideas. Our forums are designed to focus on topics that align with our core impact areas: education, community development, environment, and arts and public spaces. We are proud to create these spaces where sectoral experts, thought leaders, and our CSO partners, the likes of Danu from Souls 24/7, stakeholders and the public that can come together and share best practices to advance social impact. Hasanah, we believe in the power of continuous learning that should have no barriers. And this year, we are particularly excited to introduce our inaugural Yayasan Hasanah ILMU Circle, and this is where we are today, Alhamdulillah. This is designed as a special opportunity for our students and scholars to engage more deeply with these meaningful conversations. This year's theme, Resilient Leadership and Sustainable Impact, reflects the growing importance of leadership, adaptability, and sustainability in today's complex, VUCA, changing rapidly world. And in an increasingly interconnected global landscape, the link between leadership has never been more crucial. Effective leadership not only drives the success of organizations, but shapes societal values and economic policies. And these are important to make sure that our leaders who embrace adaptability can navigate challenges, foster inclusive environments, and implement sustainable practices, making sustainable impact on both their organizations and the communities that they serve. Leaders have the power to inspire and mobilize others. And this is something that's really important for us to remember. And this influence, this form of soft power, is pivotal to make sure that we are leaders that drive social and economic transformation, not just leaders that serve themselves. And these are the things that we want to bring back to our country, demi Malaysia. And it is not enough to focus on organizational success alone. The broader societal landscape in which we operate are deeply interconnected and also require professionals to cultivate resilience and continuous learning and ability to develop new skills. This adaptability is vital not only in serving the country, but it is important for your own personal growth and the competitiveness of your organization. Another key focus is the integration of economic growth with the environmental sustainability and social equity. And leaders must ensure that their policies promote sustainability, especially for marginalized communities. But as we know, in the world of misinformation, in which Dr. Anya specializes, it's also important to communicate this well and truthfully to make sure that the right voices and the right messages are disseminated in truth. And that is a lesson from today's ILMU circle that we'll bring, inshallah. And these issues, which are central to the conversations that we'll have today, will make sure that you also have opportunities to ask questions and ask the right questions. And that's also an important part of our learning. It's not just us speakers at the front here sharing our knowledge, but at the end of the day, it's more important for us to learn from one another. And sometimes the best voices, the voices of truth, are the dissenting voices. And this ILMU circle is meant to expose you not only to ask the right questions, but to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. We were just reflecting this morning in our morning meeting at the United Nations, where in the role of a diplomacy, what's more important is to be able to listen and without judgment, with independence and objectivity, and making sure that every views are taken into consideration. And as much as I like to say that we do apply Chatham House rules, we are online, we are connected to the world, and this will be saved on YouTube, all media platforms. So I can only pray and hope that everyone will then use this information judiciously, with integrity, and make sure that we speak in truth, and the truth and justice shall prevail. Have a good ILMU circle today, and I hope that this will become a tradition for Yayasan Khazanah and something that will continue to cherish in the decades to come, inshallah. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Wan Siti, for the opening remarks. Without further ado, we shall proceed with our first panel for today, which includes a Q&A at the end. This will be the session one, named Leadership for Societal Impact and Economic Change, moderated by Minor Zafira, and will feature panelists Wan Siti herself, Dr. Amir Rahman. You came in just in time, and of course, and finally, Dr. Anya herself. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Great, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, to those in the room and also online. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel session titled Leadership for Societal Impact and Economic Change. We have an incredible group of leaders, as Lily has alluded to, who embody this theme in their respective fields. And I have the honor to guide our conversation today, and hopefully with your participation as well later on. So our discussion today will focus on the intersection of leadership, social empowerment, and economic transformation, from how advocacy and development initiatives uplift communities, to how strategic leadership fosters ethical investments and inclusive growth. And finally, to the critical role media and technology play in shaping societal narratives. Before we dive into our discussion, I would like to set the stage by asking our panelists to reflect on their leadership philosophies, given that each of them bring a unique approach to leadership, whether it's driving social advocacy or building responsible businesses or influencing public narratives through the media. So today we'll explore how their leadership impacts the broader societal and economic landscapes. So I'll start with a series of questions to each of our panelists, and I will open up to Q&A both from the room and online. And I'll start with Dr. Amir, if you don't mind. You have a vast background in shaping ethical business practices, as well as driving inclusive economic growth. In your experience, what are the key elements of strategic leadership that would contribute to this kind of growth? And how can business leaders integrate them?
Well, thank you so much, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a real honor and pleasure to be with you. And I'm so excited to have the Khazanah scholars here virtually with us and also in the room. If I may say on behalf of the university, and my colleague is here as well, we're really proud and honored to be able to host you. And we feel that you belong here. It's very important to know that what you have to offer the world is very valuable. We need to hear more of it, and we need to benefit from your perspective, and learning a bit more also how you are selected, how you are groomed before you even arrive at our universities. Tells us that you have a lot to give to our other students and for us as faculty to learn from you. So please do know that we are really joyed to have you. And also we feel that we benefit from your being here. And that's very important. So to address your question about leadership and how I've seen, I've been blessed to see a lot of leaders in my life in different sectors, different organizational setups, and some more successful than others, some more uplifting than others. And a couple of points I would give by way of introduction for it. One is it's very important to give before you take. So you need to give before you take, meaning you all have something to offer, some insight, some knowledge, some relationships, some kind words that you can give. So, whether that be in a business setting or any other setting, it's important to realize you have something to offer and to bring that and to give that to the counterparty. And it's only natural then that you'll create value for yourself and your institution. But if you begin your discussion with what can you do for me, or what can I get from you today, it's a very different tone from saying, how can I help you? How can I make your world better? Another beautiful benefit of this, from the mindset of beginning with how can I serve and help before getting anything back from it, is it forces you to understand the other party, to understand what they care about, to understand what their priorities are. And I have the great benefit of not only teaching here, but then I do office hours with my students. And they of course come because they think they see some value in it. But I'll tell you, for me, I find a ton of value also in speaking with them. And every single time that I speak with a student, there's some way in which they can improve the course. There's some way they can provide some insight, some knowledge, some perspective that would be a benefit to others. So even if it's dealing with someone who you think is your senior or someone more experienced from you, I can guarantee that they have something to learn from you, just like you have something to learn from them. So as I said, getting to know how you can solve problems and make things very, very important. So give before you receive. Second thing I would say in a similar spirit is to always to be the person who raises their hand, either physically or metaphorically, to take on and to address challenges as they arise. Because, it is the way we grow is by stretching and exercising our capabilities. And, I've been blessed in my own life to see some fantastic results from that. So one small story share with you is that the one institution very close to my heart is the Mercer County Community College. I live in a county called Mercer County in New Jersey. And community colleges, for those who may not be as familiar with them, these are state government help-funded institutions that are for accessing higher education for any student who is willing and able to take it on. So, you don't need to apply to a competitive application. It's the opposite of the Hasanah Scholars in some ways, in terms of its being non-quote-unquote selective. But what it does is it creates a fantastic opportunity set for people to access higher education and to gain skills and to improve themselves and also to gain access to better education. I mentioned the community college is very dear to me. I serve today as a trustee of the college. And people sometimes are surprised when they find out how I got involved in the college. And the way I got involved was that I moved to a town called West Windsor, which is in Mercer County, and I wrote a letter to our mayor because I liked the town very much. And I wrote a letter saying, I've just moved to this town. This is a little bit about my background. I would love to find ways I can help the community. Did not have any idea what that would be. And to my pleasant surprise, got back an email the next day. The mayor would like to meet with you, met with the mayor. He suggested I get involved in the college, and one thing led to another, and I became a trustee. So, often your path to leadership will come about by raising your hand, offering your services, and then, solving problems for the institution. And they in return will support you and help you advance yourself. So those are my brief introductory remarks on some aspects of leadership philosophy.
Great, thank you so much. That's very helpful insights and reminders as well to the scholars what kind of person you want to become with the power that you're given with, right? Puan Siti, I'll move on to you. You have led numerous initiatives in social empowerment, right? Particularly through your work at Yayasan Hasanah. How do you define leadership in the context of social advocacy and empowerment?
I think what's most important about being a good leader is being kind. I think that's really the foundation and the basis of a very good leader. And I think goodness is what Hasanah is about. People ask, what does Hasanah mean? Hasanah is plain and simple goodness. And that is the Pitra and the reason that of Hasanah. And I think it starts by us being kind and the intention of being kind. And how does that work? Well, that works by offering, volunteering your services or your knowledge or whatever gifts that the universe of Allah has given, that is bestowed upon you. And that's very important because that comes from that intention to serve. And I'm a firm believer of servant leadership, where as a leader, It doesn't matter if you're the one bringing food, for example. Even if you are the CEO, it makes you a better leader if you're the one serving food. And just like a hadith that says that the husband or the father or the family is has the responsibility to bring food to the table and serve it to the family, that is the basis of good leadership, serving others. And it always starts with something as simple as your household relationship between a husband and wife, father to a child, mother to a child, or mother to the husband, and all that is our central to our home, central to our heart, and central to what matters most at the end, regardless of whether you're in Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, the best places in the world. It comes down to you being kind and serving others. And that is the basis of a good leader. And in the context of our work at Yayasan Hasanah, I shared with you, our mandate is to serve the whole nation. And that do take us places all over the world, because whatever social impact that affects the rest of the world also affects our country and the geopolitics that come along with it. And our scholars, I'm proud to say the 1,600 plus of you and the 400 plus which are still studying in Malaysia and nationwide are the torchbearers. And I do hope that we are raising leaders which are kind, which are empathetic, which have the values of Hasanah that is embedded in each and every one of you. Because yes, I'm here to remind you that you are here due to public money, but at the same time, it is something that has to resonate with your heart, which is to serve the cause for the country, demi negara. And it is something that is what is good for Malaysia is also good for all of humankind and humanity. And in the context of Yayasan Sana, it's also about listening to others, to communities, empowering them, giving voices to those without voices. And that includes sometimes flora and fauna, biodiversity, our forest cover, everything that comes under the sky in the country. And we do serve all sorts of causes. And it's about respecting one another, having values. Very important to have values. In Hasanah, we have values that what we call RT. And this is about being accountable to all your actions. It's about respecting others. It's about making sure that you are inclusive in all your actions, and trusting one another. And I think this applies to each and every one of you. And values is what drives our actions, and values is what keeps us to being a good leader, especially when you're accountable for your actions. And that is the things that binds our soul together. And we can only influence to bind each other's heart. Leadership, to me, is also not about force. I can only influence you to action, to goodness. But to me, this is what makes a long-lasting change. When you are binded by the strength of your heart, not the strength of your force. And I hope this is something that we'll communicate throughout our panel session today, and also reflected in the good questions that you will ask us later. Thank you.
Thank you, Siti. And I think that's very reflective of the conversation that we had before lunch, when somebody was asking what does it take to become a Khazanah scholar, beside the very rigorous 5-round process. What they're really looking for is not so much of how smart you are, because there are a lot of smart people in Malaysia, but it's really your intent, right? And how your vision and your ambitions can really contribute to the country. And I think all of us here in the room at least have that idea, have that intent. And hopefully with this scholarship, with this power and influence, we're able to execute that vision. So indeed, I completely agree with what you said, Siti. Moving on to Dr. Anya, your work on disinformation is more relevant than ever in today's media environment. So from your perspective, how can media leaders effectively combat disinformation while also fostering an inclusive and democratic public discourse?
Right. I also just wanted to respond to some of the opening remarks. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I just want to say it's wonderful to see you all here. I got back from Malaysia 1 week ago, so I'm just getting over my jet lag. We had a fantastic time at the Khazanah Forum, really inspiring. And then my husband gave a talk in Kuching, and then we went to see an old friend in KK. So we had a really terrific, I can't tell you how many great meals I had and lovely hospitality. So, and I brought Zafira back lots of rendang and lots of eggs. But one example of what Dr. Amir was talking about, the sort of bottom-up leadership that I saw, was before we went to Malaysia, we asked our Columbia alumni office, you know, are there any alumni that we could meet in KL? And they said, you know, we're really not sure. We think there's just a couple there. We really don't know. So I'm very impressed that you all know where your scholars are. And it's amazing how often people don't know where their alumni are. And then I think it was Zafira figured out that we were there and then got in touch and said, you know, there's 75 people on the WhatsApp group in KL, and we want to see you. And we were only in KL for about a day and a half. And we said, we would love to see you. It's a bit hard for us to leave the forum. Maybe you could just come and have some cake and cookies with us, a cup of tea at the hotel. We'll invite you, of course, we'll pay for it. And within a day, we had, I think, 14 people come to the hotel. And then the surprise when we left was that Hasanah actually picked up the tab, which we weren't expecting. But I thought, that's amazing. That is a real group of organized people to communicate, to take initiative, to make it happen. I was just very, very impressed. And before I prepared for the talk, I asked my students, if you were coming, what would you say about leadership? And I was very surprised because I always think leadership is making people do things. But what they all said was exactly what you've both been saying, Siti and Dr. Amir, which is listening and then showing by example. So my last example is this building was a very big deal for the business school. I don't know if you know, it cost about $600 million.
Wow.
It took about 10 years to build. At SIFA, where I am, we're very jealous because it's gorgeous building. And when it came time to move, it was during the pandemic. And, you know, my husband had been at the other building for 20 years. There were so many books and papers. Everybody was scared to come into the office. So I came in, just me, with the building maintenance people and helped unpack the boxes, helped set up the offices, left like little gifts and pretty keychains for my husband's staff, hoping to entice people to come in and make this their home. So I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about, was, you know, trying to serve first. I have so much to say about media, but I don't want to hog the room. So maybe I'll just start and you know, we can talk more about it. But I think that, you know, the world, you're here before the elections. We're at a time of tremendous polarization. I know there's polarization in Malaysia as well. And so one of the huge challenges for leadership is how do you bridge that gap? You've probably seen the posters in the building. We've obviously, you know, the war in Gaza has created a tremendous amount of polarization. We have a lot of different communities. So I would say two things. One is that in terms of how we've managed it at school, part of it is just really listening and being empathetic. Has served me very well. The students have been fantastic. It's been a really interesting year, as you say, listening to people. And then in terms of media, we can talk more, but after 2016, journalists all over the world said, you know, there's these rise of populists, there's these rise of demagogues, there's all these people like Trump going around lying, you know, what do we do about it? So in the world of journalism, there's been a huge shift towards audiences, spending time with the communities and trying to understand what their information needs are and working with them. So I think that's been pretty tremendous, but I'll stop it for now and I can continue. And my card is here. I'll have to go to my own office hours before 4, but my card's here too.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Anya. And thank you also for making the time to meet our students in Columbia, because I can speak from personal experience that yourself and also your husband, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, have been embodying this leadership, this kind leadership that we talked about, right? You open up your home to students all the time. You're making sure the students have everything they need and making sure they're also equipped to be, leaders out in the world or wherever they come from as well. So thank you for that as well.
I'm sorry, my husband's in Washington today. He was really sorry to miss you.
We tried to get him here.
Our house is so full of stuff from Malaysia right now. Tea and shawls, and it's like a whole Malaysia thing happening in our living room right now. Sorry, missing out.
Next time, hopefully.
Yeah.
So going back to your Fund City, I think Hasanah as a sovereign wealth fund is often looked upon, right, in helping to solve some of Malaysia's biggest challenges, from energy transition to investing in ecosystem, as well as at times solving Malaysia's inequity issues. So based on these huge expectations that the nation has on Hasanah and by extension Yayasan Hasanah, what challenges have you faced in leading initiatives at Yayasan Hasanah, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you for that question. The best thing that I believe Khazanah National has created with the creation of Yayasan Hasanah is the endowment model that allocated 3 billion with a certain level of income annually. And that endowment is held in perpetuity and is invested very well by trusted investors within Khazanah National. And this allows us to be in a social impact cause that we champion over the long run. So everything that we do is meant to catalyze and reconvene collaborators, co-collaborators, partners, such as the session of today, to create impact over the long run. And this is something that we take pride upon. And there are not very many funders out there who are able to stay in a cause of social justice for more than a decade. Our program, for example, for community-based approaches in public housing in the country has spanned for almost a decade now. And we're able to also convene, for example, our tiger preservation work in the Belum rainforest has at least 10 partners working in 10 different areas, from education, women's health, youth, livelihood, solar, rural infrastructure, and more. And that is something that is very powerful in the context of solving 21st century greatest problems. But it all starts with multi-year funding, endowment or wakaf, Islamic social finance, and using all the knowledge that we already have. And that's what I want to emphasize with 21st century. Most of the problems that we have already have the solutions. But the issue is that they're not connected. And we need more connectors. But why are they not connected? Oftentimes, information is asymmetry. People don't know the truth, for example, of a situation in a place. And there's a lot of misinformation about a community, people who are in need. So because of that, and it created an environment of mistrust. The polarization that Dr. Anya mentioned can create barriers of entry in economic terms. And these are unnecessary, but I can tell you there are more than enough resources in the world for all the problems that we are facing, and they're not, we are not short of funders globally. It's just that how do you create path and how do you find path to all the problems? And this is where we are here to disseminate truth and turn each and every one of you into pathfinders to speak truth, to bring justice to the communities, and connect the dots that need to be connected to the solutions.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
By the way, do people want to sit? We have extra chairs.
Yeah, please.
It's
gonna be a long Yeah. No, thank you, Conciti. And I agree. I can reflect on that because, part of the challenges that we face at Policy School is really that, right? Like, yes, you have solutions, yes, you have funding, but how do you mobilize all of that together and align them together and have business models that can make the solutions not only effective, but also sustainable in the long term? Thank you. So I'll move on to Dr. Amir. Strategic leadership often requires bold decision-making and a clear vision of the future. Could you share an example where your leadership approach not only addressed an immediate challenge, but also led to a significant long-term organizational change or impact?
With decision-making is really the essence of leadership in many ways, in the sense that, part of the responsibility of a leader is to allocate resources and prioritize needs, whether that be needs of the team, needs of your customers, needs of the organization at large, et cetera. So I'm really grateful that you asked the question. If I may share one framework that one of my mentors taught us and taught the firm as a whole, and it's been so precious for me in my life, has been that every decision that you make has material considerations and moral considerations. And both of them are very important. So you have to get them both right. That's your job. This was a private equity firm, so of course you want to make good decisions and return capital and generate profits, et cetera. However, what he said is that of these two, by far the more important are the moral considerations. Because if you get the material considerations wrong, we can fix that. But it's easier to address that. But when you get the moral considerations wrong, sometimes that's irreparable, and that's what you're much more damaging in the long run. So the idea around decision making to say, to make decisions that where you take the moral aspects and the material aspects into consideration, again, get them both right, but remember that the moral ones are the more critical ones to make sure you don't make mistakes on. So I can give you an example then of sort of when we had to make difficult decisions and found benefit in that. So often when you're investing, you'll have people who want to contribute. So we had an occasion where there was someone who wanted to invest in our fund, an institution that wanted to invest in the fund, but it came with a lot of conditions and requirements and objectives that were not consistent with what the other investors wanted or what we felt was good for the vision or ideal for the institution going forward. So there was a temptation to accept this capital, to accept the conditions, or at least find a way to incorporate that, even though we felt that it would not be good and not consistent with the mission overall. But again, there's a short-term attraction to it. And so thankfully, the decision was made to not accept that large capital commitment. And instead, we started with a much smaller capital base. But thankfully, it was enough for us to do what we needed to do, and we never regretted making that decision. So the idea of being able to turn away or turn down something that appears lucrative, but it comes with strings attached, or it comes with moral obligations that are not consistent with what we need to do, is something we've seen time and time again. If I could share one beautiful story about my wife and I lived in Manhattan for about 15 years. And there was this beautiful restaurant where it was a great combination of Moroccan and Mexican food. Mm-hmm. And besides both starting with M, Morocco and Mexico, you might not think have much in common. But to the point that Dr. Anya and Constantine were raising about listening and learning, the story behind it was Moroccan entrepreneurs, and their staff were Mexican. Or they had Mexican workers in the staff. And so they discovered Mexican food is fantastic. So why don't we start serving halal Mexican food? So anyway, they were doing that. So my wife and I were sitting there, and a large group walked in, and they wanted to be served alcohol. So they sat down and they started ordering drinks. And the proprietor said, sorry, we don't serve alcohol here because our religion does not allow that. So they were very, understanding the customers. They said, okay, is it okay if we go out and bring our own alcohol? And they said, I'm sorry, we don't allow that because we're trying to create an environment here that's alcohol free. Again, very respectful customers. So they said, okay, well, got up and left. It was a large group. It was probably 10 people. And I was saying to my wife, wow, this is such an amazing degree of integrity to their values. Mm-hmm. And I kid you not, as soon as this group left, a much larger group, say 15, came into the restaurant. And nobody could have predicted that was going to happen. But nobody saw that other group coming. But it shows that they had conviction, and then things worked out well for them. And it's not always that immediate, but it is an example again of, when you let go of something that seems attractive for you in the moment, but then you're compensated in some ways you cannot anticipate. And then I'll just close with this last statement. This is a promise for us in our scriptures, whoever is mindful, conscious of God, he makes for them a way out, and he provides for them from where they do not expect. Mm-hmm. And I said, was thinking as I was sitting there with my wife that this is such a great example of that. I've never seen it so well illustrated. So anyway, stick to your principles, good things will come your way. It doesn't take long to see.
Well, while we're talking about drinks, I discovered the 3 sours.
Okay.
In KK. Do you know that drink? It's like sour plum, lemon,
Yes.
lime. Oh my God. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's why they all
Yeah.
that remarkable.
You must come back to Malaysia. I think you're still
So into
having
it.
thinking about it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Amir, for sharing. And that's also very reflective of, say, sustainable investing of double materiality, right? It's not just profit and materiality, the single materiality is also what impact you have in the world. And I'm glad that that's the area that you're focusing on, because I think that's very much needed in the space. I'll move on to you, Dr. Anya. Given the rapid advances in technology, especially generative AI, which we cover a lot in our classes at TMAC and CEPA, what role do you see AI playing in the future of media leadership generally, and also what ethical considerations should leaders dealing with media keep in mind?
Sure, a few things. Well, one is that the big campaign we've been on for a while has been to try to get Google and Meta to help pay for news. And that's an example of everybody in the ecosystem has a responsibility. Journalists are producing high quality information, and platforms are taking it, profiting from it, selling advertising, and not putting back. So my students and I have been working on this for quite a long time. And I think that in Australia, Brazil, South Africa, they're talking about digital levies. So I would love to see Malaysia take some regional leadership and promote an ASEAN-wide digital levy that could support journalism. Part of why we have this long tie with Malaysia is because Dr. M imposed capital controls in 1998, and many economists said it was a terrible idea. And my husband came out in favor of Malaysia, and that turned out to be absolutely the right thing to do during the height of the Asian financial crisis. So I do think sort of bold, creative ideas can come from smaller countries and things like that. I think in terms of generative, so now we've sort of advanced. We're having a big conference on Friday because we're trying to get OpenAI and the large language model companies to pay journalists and creators for their content. So I think that's really important for the sort of future of the information ecosystem to make sure there's funding. But in terms of sort of upending leadership and generation, I think clearly generative AI will transform the world and will make lots of people my age kind of irrelevant. And this is something, I just had another meeting about this at Columbia today, which is all of you will learn so much more quickly how to use it. And I feel like at this point, our generation can maybe encourage you to think about the big picture, to think about some of the ethics, to think about the fact that, the shiny new thing is like when Bitcoin showed up, everybody thought, oh, economic rules don't apply anymore. Cryptocurrency is different. But all of us older people who remembered all the financial crises knew that speculation is speculation. So I think what we can do at our generation is help you think about this and not become too sort of enamored. But I think it's going to be a very dramatic shift very, very quickly in terms of leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree that it will be a dramatic shift, but I also don't think people like you will ever be irrelevant. We go back to, what leadership is intent, is kindness, and that's something AI will never be able to replicate.
Yeah, and I think that's also a point. There was a great article in New York Magazine recently about how the sort of poor quality of pictures and text and the kind of smudginess. And before we went to KL, we were in Bhutan, where the king has had an investment forum, because Bhutan has a similar problem to Malaysia, which is young people are leaving. They have 800,000 people in the country, and since the pandemic, they've lost 75,000 people. And again, not to keep quoting Mahathir, but Dr. M, but you remember he called the brain drain a form of colonialism because countries educate their people and then they lose them. So Bhutan is trying to figure out what to do. And we brought one of our young cousins who's in Silicon Valley, and he just said, in this world of like AI kind of mediocrity, real people, real connections, and human contact are going to become so valuable. I thought that was an interesting idea.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I'll move on to Kwan City. We talked about earlier the unique position that Hasanah is in, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of what Malaysia needs to do or wants to do for its progress and growth would require huge private sector involvement and funding. So from your perspective in Yayasan Hasanah, how can leaders in the social sector effectively collaborate with corporate and private entities in order to drive greater impact?
I think that sort of cooperation is inevitable. In the 21st century, I think one of the skills that you need to have is to learn to collaborate. None of us is as strong or as smart as all of us in this room collectively. I think we have at least a few decades or at least of knowledge and from different sectors and very diverse too. And that is what we need to harness. And that's the basis of strong leadership, is to be able to bring more people on board and have the humility to admit that you are not the smartest person in the room. If you're the smartest person in this room, you're in the wrong room. So I think that's very important. And another value that I would like to bring into the leadership conversation is about humility, which is very important because that's the secret ingredient to make sure that we can collaborate. And whichever label that you put on, whether it's corporate, whether it's civil society partners, each of us are actually essentially of solving a problem. And the skill that's most important is to define the problem. Because often enough, we make assumptions about the problem. And in the process, creating more problems, adding problems to the pre-existing conditions by not defining the problems that we have. And in that sense, in Hasanah, what we try to do is create long-term impact, solving the root cause of the problem. And that is not something that's always visible. And often enough, we do have a theory of change and we try and measure it by measuring impact. But I like what Brother Amir introduced to me when I was colleagues with him at the UN. And he was graciously spending time volunteering at that time with UNDP, and we were solving the World Humanitarian Summit, the 2015 and 2016. And he had reminded me about the concept of incremental change. Because I'm big about like, let's just change your world in one sweep and be done with it. I just want to do it now. But he reminded me of incremental change, and that was again the humility that I had. So I was really overwhelmed at that time by the scale of the problem and the fundraising and the solutions that we needed to bring to the world's greatest humanitarian issues at that time. And the issues have only been compounded with complexity. We were at the UN this morning speaking with Antoine and diplomats at the UN, and it's been compounded with the issue of climate change. Where in the world you would imagine that Sahel would be flooded? The Sahel region has always been experiencing drought for many decades. And no one can predict that it has been flooding, and it will be flooding for many more decades. And this is the issue of climate change that has really added multiple layers of complexity to our humanity. And it is a problem that we need to solve collectively. So where I stand, the lens I'm looking at, we can't afford to not collaborate. The issues that are facing us in the future are only going to get bigger, and we have to join hand and heart and head. Yeah, the 3H together to collaborate to solve this, because believe it or not, you're not going to have any other options but to work together.
Oh, thank you. And I like the point that you have on incremental change, because I think that's how I see policy making also, that it's impossible. There's no silver bullet to any of the problems, given the challenges and the complexities, and that a lot of what a lot of policymakers try to do is, improve things incrementally from things that have been done before. And sometimes we're just paving way for what is to come for future leaders. So, and that also thinking is also important, to not feel completely overwhelmed the fact that you cannot change the world overnight. At least that's what I remind myself as well. So thank you, Pasiti. Dr. Amir, going back to you, given the increasing diversity in today's global workforce, I think inclusivity is more than just a moral imperative, it's a strategic advantage, right? So what advice would you give to emerging leaders in business regarding the importance of inclusivity in their strategies? And also, how can they ensure that diverse perspectives are not only represented in a room, but also actively into decision-making processes?
I love it, and I will very happily address the question. May I go back to humility for a second that Pansiti was speaking about? And there's a beautiful sort of story that when I see I see the fellows in this room, I'm reminded of, and it relates to the idea of humility. So it's a pre-modern time, there's a king, and that king has a court and advisors, and all, powerful person. And there's one advisor who everyone is getting jealous of because this person keeps getting closer and closer to the king, and he becomes a favorite of that. And so you know how office and court politics, and so people will say, well, we've got to find a way to scheme against this person. So they say, let's start following him. So they follow him around, and they discover that there's a room that he has in the palace that only he has the key to. And he goes to that room every night, and he opens it, and he goes inside, and then he comes back, and nobody else knows what's there. So they say, aha, you've caught it. So they go to the king and they say, Your Majesty, this person has been stealing from you. This person has been robbing you. This person has a secret treasure chest. And so yes, we found him out. So then the king summons him and says, Is it true that you have a room here and we have a key? You're the only person. Yes, it's true. So then he said, Oh, I must see what's there. So they go to the room, they open it, and they see inside of it is a very plain set of sandals and an old tattered shirt. So then they asked him, everyone is astounded, it's like gold, silver, jewels, what is this? And he said, Your Majesty, when I came to this court for the first time, these were the sandals I was wearing, and this is the shirt on my back. Mm-hmm. And now when I have riches and power and fame, I love to come back to this room and I see where it came from. Mm-hmm. I see the sandals that I used to wear, the shirt, and it keeps me grounded. So everyone starts weeping, and they realize that, and all of his rivals say, well, this man, there's something special about it. So they stop, conspiring against him. So I say this because you will very likely be, and my dear friend Shahzad, you'll hear from later, and we were in university together. And you are at a time in your life which is very sweet and very special. And you are very likely to be very successful and very prominent and very wealthy. And these times of hardship, maybe when you might scramble to find a meal, or you don't have the right shoes to wear for an interview, or you can't find something that you need, is there sweetness to this? Remember this, because when you have 100 people, 200 people, 10,000 people reporting to you, this will be a good thing to remember. So I'm sorry I went off on a tangent.
I like that.
We're talking about inclusivity.
Yes, inclusivity. Yes, inclusivity. All right, I'll give a quick anecdote on that, and then I'll be very tactical about it with Dr. Anya here. She's of course far more expert than me when it comes to communication, but I'll give you a communication story. There was I mentioned that I lived in New York here with my wife. My wife is a medical doctor. She was doing her surgery clerkship at that time, so very early mornings. I was working for a firm called the Boston Consulting Group, and very demanding client we had in Westchester. So we had this terrible, or what I found terrible, situation where my wife would go to sleep every night at say 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. I would come home at about 7 p.m. and I had to work because my manager would, at the end of the day, which is pretty typical, is say, okay, Amr, run this analysis, do this, produce these slides, and then send them to me tonight. So that's precisely what he would say, send them to me tonight. So we were in this very sad situation where I would come home, maybe see my wife, maybe not see my wife, and then she would be gone before I woke up. So anyway, I was feeling bummed about this. One day I asked Steve, my manager, I said, Steve, by the way, the slides that I send you, when do you look at them? And he said, I look at them at about 7 in the morning. So I said, so how about this? I'll get you the slides by 7 in the morning, but I won't get them to you at night. And he said, sure, it makes no difference to me. And to me, it was life-changing. To get that 1 hour, 90 minutes with my wife, it's a wonderful thing. So in your positions of leadership, be precise about what you need and when you need it, et cetera. Recognize people have different lifestyles, different preferences, different needs. There's something that you can give them or concession you can make that might make them immensely happy. You don't even realize is causing them distress, right? So that's an example of inclusivity where being able to communicate in a more precise way what's necessary, what the job entails, et cetera, and allow people to flourish by accommodating what's important to them and also bringing their whole selves to what they do. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. That's amazing advice. Dr. Anya, moving to you. Media has a profound influence on shaping public opinions and upholding the integrity of democratic systems. And I think it's particularly true in a time like this in the United States, right? So can you provide an example of how media leadership has positively influenced social narratives or democratic processes?
That's a really interesting question. I think that, because I see we're almost out of time here. I think that for journalists, the idea that truth telling and factual evidence-based reporting it's an article of faith. And that in this world where there's so much lying and there's so much false information, having a group of people that are really willing to put their lives on the line to provide accurate information so that societies can make good decisions, I think that's incredibly important. And of course, in Malaysia, we have the example of the press coverage of 1MDB, which was an incredibly powerful story. You've got groups like Malaysia Kini, people who have really made a commitment. So I would say that's right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So then I guess, given that we have 5 minutes, we'll open up to Q&A. Anyone in the room? We'll start with folks in the room. Any questions you want to ask our panelists? I don't know if there's questions online as well.
Can I ask a question on behalf of
Yeah,
fellows,
sure.
which is, if I could just ask the group here, if you could go reflect on your careers a little bit, right? And so put yourself back in the shoes of someone who's college-age graduate student. What is it that you're most proud of having done? And what would you go back and change if you go back and change, if anything? Right? So maybe we switch it and start with Dr. Shaprin and work our way over. Or maybe that's unfair. Maybe I should start with Albert.
Yeah. Sorry. I think one of the best things I did is embracing who I am, where I came from, and the fact that I did not win all the time. I think that was one of the best things, and I have no regrets with that. In fact, the fact that I came from a very humble upbringing, I grew up in public housing, has actually created a lived reality that is helping me do the work that I do now. And one of the things that I thought that I'm proud of is that I'm proud of my parents. And they showed me that there are things which are more precious than things that money can't buy. For example, unconditional love, trust, support, being kind. And when you say I love you to someone, you really mean it. And it's really not to buy favors. So those are things which are real, which are authentic. And I think it's shaping me to be who I am today. So no regrets at all.
I think two things. I guess I'm most proud of the little political activism that I did. But I think my piece of advice, and it may not apply to business school students, but I think that young people are often very insecure. And, you know, if somebody doesn't answer your email, you think, oh, they don't like me, or they think that they're better. And then you get to my age and you realize someone doesn't answer email. They may be taking care of their mother who's sick. They might be taking care of their kids. They might be under a huge deadline. So I think when you get older, you just get sort of more relaxed. You know, like writing. Writing is so hard when you're young. So now some of you use ChatGPT because you think it's got to be perfect. And I'm much more at the point where I'm like, I'm not Tolstoy, but I can get something done. So I think feeling insecure and like, oh, I can't even start because I just don't know if it's going to be good enough. I'd say maybe that would be something to just get over when you're in your 20s.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah, you're actually like beautiful and smart, and it doesn't have to be perfect, is what I would kind of say.
Sure. Well, you know, one thing I'm really grateful for from my college days is having built some very deep and very sincere friendships and bonds with people who I feel so immensely close to, even to this day. And, you know, there's a sincerity and a purity in these relationships that I think is hard to replicate later in life. So I would say, you know, the friendships you form, especially with people who, you know, you share values with, you share priorities with, you want to solve the same problems in the world, you know, you're passionate about the same things. There's a preciousness around this. So I think, you know, those things, you know, those friendships, and then the ability to then be able to call back on that network and to share that life journey is immensely wonderful. So I think that's a great thing. With regard to something I wish I had done differently, I wish I had been more aware or comfortable about experimenting with things that I was not good at and failing in safe ways, right? So I don't think it would have been advisable, necessarily to take a lot of courses where I got bad grades or things like that. I recognize that probably made sense to play it safe. But I do wish, that I had maintained certain hobbies or picked up things that I was not necessarily immediately talented or good at, but were enriching to me and enjoyable, et cetera. So I think being able to find safe ways where you can experiment, take risk, and fail, and then learn from those failures and get better is a wonderful thing. So one very concrete thing, for example, is if you want to learn a language that you don't speak right now, but you're concerned about your GPA, you're concerned about your time for it. So then you don't have to do it through your college. You can do it through an online course, you Duolingo, et cetera. So find outlets that are lower stakes, and you can still pick up the learning without the commitment. So that's what I would say: finding safer ways to experiment and to take risks and to fail sometimes, because it's good for your growth.
Great. Thank you. These questions are they online?
Yeah, just for Dr. Anya. You mentioned about generative AI and the older generation coming up to create a sort of check balance in this whole regulation of AIs and stuff like that. At this point, being one of the heads in Columbia of communication, where does the regulation stand in your discussion? And what do you see it's going to happen in the immediate future right now? Be it nationally, globally, in terms of...
Sure.
Yeah.
So, by the way, your point that if we all collaborate or have information, we can solve problems, I actually think there has to be political will. And I think this has been a huge problem in terms of tech regulation. I just finished a brief for UNESCO on generative AI and journalism and looked at different regulations around the world. And there's, I can recommend a lot of books, but we're really seeing very different models emerging. So the US has been very hands-off on regulation because many of these companies are our companies. Obviously, China has kind of thrown the book at a lot of this stuff, and the EU is kind of in the middle, still respecting human rights, but still trying to get a bit of control over these companies. And they've had the AI Act. So I think we're going to see different models, but I think we're in a worrisome situation, actually, because I think that in general, these companies are powerful. And I think that they've managed to forestall regulation. I mean, I'm just thinking about the lessons from social media, but I think it's worrisome about AI as well. It was interesting in Malaysia because I had some meetings with different people at Hasanah who are researching this, and it feels like Malaysia is not really yet ready. And then you have that problem of small countries. What can they do? So yeah, if you're here on Thursday night, come to our panel discussion. It's in the building next door about this. And there's actually tonight on AI, there's like 4 events on AI in the elections this week in Columbia. There's a lot of stuff happening, but I can send you links to Zafira who can share.
That'll be interesting. Anyone has questions?
If I were to add to that, I think there's a lot of fear with AI too, and that comes back to embracing AI as one of the potential solutions. I think I'm imagining that AI could be used to predict climate change patterns, for example, and also it could be used in field building. And there are multiple School of Future studies globally that are looking into some of these solutions by even studying bird migration patterns and applying AI to it. But I think we have not really optimized the potential. And even at the start, it's almost as if it's still a baby at infancy, and there's still so many talks about regulating it. I think we need to get past this fear. I don't have the solution to this, but we cannot act based on fear. And I think that comes back to what I mean by being a good leader. Also, you need to have courage. Courage is not in the absence of fear. Courage is acting in spite of your fear. And this is where, in the face of AI, for example, you need to act in spite of your fear, have courage to fully embrace the potential, because the solutions lie therein.
So I hired the mayor's advisor on AI to teach a policy course at CEPA, Neil Parrick. So he, I remember when I interviewed him a few years ago, he explained all the ways, things that you're talking about, like predicting food poisoning or identifying voter turnout problems. Or of course, it's been used for sentencing guidelines, not for, in discriminatory ways in healthcare. So all of that, and again, you would all, business people would know way more than I do about how it's already being used. But I also think it's really important to recognize the government has a right to regulate, and that all these big companies will always come in and tell you that they're going to solve every world problem and you can just leave it to them. And we've seen that that's not the case. So I don't think we can take fully.
We have one question online, and it's open to any of you to answer. Can you share an example of a leadership failure or a time when things didn't go as planned? And how did you learn from the experience and adapt your leadership approach from that point onwards? Anyone would like to take a step?
When things don't go as planned.
Yeah, like an example of a pending failure.
I like to think it as iteration. I would not even call it failure. I think in design thinking labs, MIT labs and such, I think the word failure is not allowed in the room. These are called iterations, and you will take as many iterations as you need to get to the outcome. That's how we invented things like electricity, light bulbs, and whatnot. I don't think we got it right the first time.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I've got plenty of examples I can tell you of my own iterations or what seemed like failures at the time. And sometimes, at least in my case, they are failures in the sense that they involve commercial situations where you're not achieving the optimal outcome for people who've entrusted you with their investment capital or with their your advisor, and they've paid you fees and you haven't necessarily given them the perfect advice. So look, I think I've got lots of those examples, but I will, if I can give you a framework which I think is helpful for this, is so there's this idea of what's called a learning cycle. It was developed by a scholar named Cole, and I found it very useful. So my doctoral work is on how private equity professionals get better at what they do, and it has to do with learning from failure. So the idea is that when something happens that is inconsistent with what you expected, either negative or positive, but people tend to learn more from negative experiences than positive ones. What you need to do is understand be very kind of specific in documenting what were the outcomes, and then drawing lessons from that, sort of being able to say, look, next time, here's some rules that I learned from this, and here's how I'm going to apply them going forward, and then reincorporate them into your decision-making process. And so the better people get better at investing by having outcomes that are suboptimal, looking back at what they believed would occur and why those things did not happen. So maybe they assumed too much growth in the market. Maybe they assumed that costs would be easier to cut. Maybe they assumed that they'd be able to enter a new market in 3 years and it took 5, whatever the reason is. And then building them into your next investment cycle. So for whatever, however you apply that, it's very, very useful. But then when some things don't go your way, to adopt a perspective and say, hey, what was I expecting, and why did it not turn out that way, and how can I make sure next time I don't repeat that?
Yeah, and in the context of investments, that's very important because it's why we promote fundamental investing. And there are risks to exiting too soon. Similarly, in social impact work, you also cannot exit too soon from a community, because sometimes certain work will take, for example, 5 years to 10 years for you to see community leadership, social cohesion. It's not something you build over 2 or 3 years. So exiting too soon is always a risk, and this is where iterations are important, and embracing failure as actually a step for progress. It means that you tried something and it's proven that it's not working, so you tweak it and do it better next time. And I think it's important in terms of in the context of scholarship and also studies. Yes, you have your CGPA, you have certain targets to meet, but at the same time, you have to be strategic about it. I think Brother Amir alluded to it. Whenever you want to have hobbies, you can take additional courses, but by being strategic with your academic studies and having some strategy, and this is where you compare notes. Sometimes some friends get have it better. different approaches. And yeah, so many of you here and online. I love to see you talk more about your situations and compare notes.
Amazing. One last question as we wrap it up, and it's all for all of you. As you reflect on your career, what kind of legacy do you hope to leave as a leader? We'll start with you.
I think I'm really lucky because I'm already seeing so many of my students who've gone into my field. So that's just unbelievable. And I was at, we did, it's just, there's so many great examples, but we did a bunch of research, I don't know, like 12 years ago, that was used by Open Society Foundation to start a journalism training program in Africa. And then I went back, I don't know, 10 years later to a retreat where they were talking about change, what had happened and next steps. And they used my paper I'd written with my students, it was a footnote on a PowerPoint. And this is happening all the time now. I go places and I see my students' work has led to something. Where obviously our Google remuneration stuff is not as successful as we would have liked, but we've had some wins. So I think that's really been exciting, seeing the kind of next generation take on the same passions that I had.
Yeah.
And improve.
I don't always answer this question very well because I don't believe in leaving a legacy. And I mean, my line of work, I think it is important to have the courage to be forgotten. And it's because what it means is that you're actually putting the people at the center. It's not about you. It's about the people that you serve. Comes back to the servant leadership I talk about. So to be brave enough to do whatever it takes to change the world, and even if someone doesn't remember your name, that will be my greatest achievement, and that's fine too.
It's an amazing perspective. Thank you, Rosie.
So we have there's a prophetic saying called the hadith in the Muslim tradition, which is, of course, it comes from the Muslim tradition, but I believe it's applicable. It really resonates with people of all belief systems. And it talks about how when a person passes away, his or her capability to do good deeds stops, except for three sources. And so for me, and I learned this hadith when I was around your age, I was an undergraduate, and it has been the guiding framework for a lot of things that I try to do, or at least aspire to do later in life. So there are three. So one of them is righteous offspring that pray or supplicate for that person. And, of course, some of us, or, but older generation will be able to tell you this, that a real picture into a person's true character is how their children and their spouse would describe them, right? So if you really want to know who I am, then ask my wife and ask my children, right? So that's, to me, very important. So have children who would want to, pray for you. Thank you. Second is knowledge from which people benefit. So obviously academia is a great platform for that. But any field that you're in, entrepreneurship, business leadership, giving, whatever line of work you're in, you could be, for example, a bus operator, and you discover a faster route, or you discover a more efficient way to refuel the bus, and you share that with people. That's amazing. And as long as people do that, it's good for you. You accrue virtue. And the last one is charity that's ongoing. So we talked about the endowment model. And one of the great things of how the world has evolved and investments have evolved is that you can have charitable giving and endowments even at modest scale. So the legacy you want to leave behind should involve charity as well. And thankfully, there are countless good causes one can support. But those are the three that I try to do. I try to have a family that would care for me and admire me. Try to develop some knowledge that people can benefit from, and finally give even modestly to what you can, and that's going to have an impact after your life.
Thank you, Dr. Amir. And this has been truly enlightening discussion, and I'd like to thank our panelists once again for sharing their leadership experiences and insights. And it's very clear whether it's social advocacy, responsible business practices, or to the ever-evolving role of media, that impact of leadership is truly profound and far-reaching. And as we continue to navigate the complexities of the world and today's challenges. I hope this conversation has served as a reminder of the power of intentional, inclusive, and ethical leadership in shaping the future. And I wish all my fellow Khazanah scholars all the best as we try to carry some of these responsibilities and aspirations for Malaysia ahead. So thank you all for your attention, for your insights, and I look forward to our continued discussions throughout the day.
What a pleasure once again to want to stay with that.
I really enjoyed that when we were sharing. Yeah, thinking of the stuff.
Thank you. How are you? Good to see you. So glad to be here. Thank you for being here, Chance. Thank you. I'm just gonna grab my drink. You can Is this
Oh, yeah, yeah, exactly. Right next door, I didn't have.
I'll take that. Yeah. You think that? I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah.
You can leave it.
What do you do here?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just.
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3, another one. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, but between I don't know what she can.
It was one side was rock and then the other side was Mexican. Sorry, catch the ball.
Yeah,
I was broke today. I that.
Okay, thank you once again to Wan Siti, Dr. Amir, as well as Dr. Anya. It was a pleasure having you with us here today. Without further ado, I think we will proceed to the next panel that we have for today, which is Resilience in Leadership and Career Development, moderated by Charisma Wong and our featuring panelists, Shazad, Danucha, as well as Dr. Aisha Simon. Please give them a warm round of applause.
It's hard act to follow the first one.
I know, I'm nervous now. What are you saying?
Oh, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for what promises to be a rich and enlightening conversation on resilience in leadership and career development. My name is Charisma Wong, and I'm so honored to be moderating this panel. We have three outstanding leaders here next to me today, each bringing unique perspectives from their respective times in education, social impact, healthcare, and community empowerment. Folks, I feel so lucky to be moderating this conversation in particular. I can attest to how pivotal Axiom Learning was in my own college application learning. And yes, let me attest to that. And I'm Indigenous Bornean, orang asal myself. So, like, truly, I on a personal level, I'm so excited to hear from you all today. Given the topic of our panel, I think it's good practice to frame our discussion with a definition of resilience. So we'll begin with Shazad. You know, as we heard earlier, you've led such a diverse career with extensive experience in education, but also in law, in investments, in energy and biotech. As you've navigated each different field with different challenges and demands, what has resilience meant for you, whether that's progressing within one field or transitioning to another?
Okay, so first of all, I have to say it's a little unfair if you get to prepare questions and I have to answer
I know.
them in real time.
It's a little, yeah, it's a little twisted.
Okay, so what does resilience mean is that, so you're right, my career has been, it's been varied, I would say. And I guess I would reframe it just a touch, right? By saying, so I grew up very poor, right? So I think once he was saying that she grew up with very humble beginnings. I used to joke when I was here at Columbia as an undergrad that I was poor because I couldn't afford the O and the R at the end of poor, right? So I grew up in the kind of, I had 3 jobs when I was here, the whole thing, and it was very, very challenging, And I think sometimes when you're navigating those challenges, you don't realize the benefit that you get because you're navigating those challenges, right? And so and actually we saw a play last night. I couldn't relate because it was just like these people talk about they have like so much privilege. Yeah. And like, oh, my life is so hard because my dog died. I'm like, okay, but like there are like harder problems out there, right? And especially when you think about guns and everything. So I would just sort of say like to kind of embrace the hardships in terms of the I think what you're kind of hinting at is I've not had one career, I've had multiple careers, right? So I've run consulting firms. I've done civil rights work. I taught at Harvard. I did private equity work at Hasanah, and I've got multiple entrepreneurships. And so, if I were to articulate what that looks like to me, it means when given the choice between doing and not doing, do. Right. In other words, if you have a chance, if somebody's saying to you, do something, and even if there's discomfort attached to that, because maybe you don't necessarily have the expertise that other people might have, or whatever else it is, to say yes. Right? Like when you say yes, your life gets bigger because you said yes to things and you learn things. And when you say no, your life gets smaller. Right? And so that's as it relates to the resilience thing, I would say the entrepreneurial venture that we've had at Axiom has been, I mean, goodness gracious, I've had people steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from us. We've had people lie to us, cheat to us. We had the pandemic, which nearly killed the business, right? I mean, we've had all sorts of challenges, right? And I think that and actually, Tansir Isman, the former managing director of Hasanah, once said something to me, which is, he said, in my job, I expect there to be 5 fires that I'm going to fight every week, right? I just expect it. So if I get to Thursday and there haven't many fires to fight, I thought what he was going to say is maybe I'll get through the week and be okay. What he actually said is if I get through Thursday and there hasn't been anything bad, I know it's going to be a bad Friday, right? Which is really profound if you think about it, because what he was essentially saying is, and I say this all the time, I should know this to all the people that Axiom constantly, which is you cannot live your life saying, oh man, I made a mistake. I should have figured out a way to avoid that mistake. A life of impact does not work that way, right? Like you make your decisions and then just trust that if stuff goes wrong, you'll figure it out. Is that helpful to answer your question?
That does
answer my question.
No, that was a perfect answer. Thank you. I'm taking notes. Yeah. I'm moving to Danisha. You began your journey with SALT as a volunteer teacher and are now stepping into the role of CEO. Throughout this progression, what has resilience meant for you, particularly in your role of working with underserved communities, like upskilling and everything? Do you think that your definition of resilience has evolved with your responsibilities?
Oh no, definitely. Because when I started as a volunteer teacher, of course, stakes are a little bit lower.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the definition of resilience is that I think being okay to acknowledge that I don't know everything is one of the main things that I think was very hard for me to do, especially when I started out as a volunteer. And that's something which I'm as well trying to help my team to also be okay with. I think I was just talking to one of the scholars today that part of me being here has been transitioning out from the team and helping them find the resilience in themselves to not always look to others for the answers, but actually to be able to try to find it in yourself and also be okay with being like, you know what, I'm going to try it out. If I make a mistake, the organization is not going to burn down. No one is dying. It's okay. I can make that mistake. And if I find out it's not right, I'll shift, I'll adjust, and I'll do whatever it takes to get back on the track that's the most aligned with what we're trying to achieve. So resilience is just being okay with yourself, I think. Yeah. Despite the hard times. Yes.
Despite the hard times. Very true. Now, Aisha, also similarly, your career has spanned multiple fields. Medical, humanitarian relief to education, and everything in between, really. How has your understanding of resilience been shaped by working in such different environments? And like, particularly here, how does that inform your leadership in a space like humanitarianism where sustainable impact and like social change can take so long?
I first would like to start with the idea that a lot of people think that we are born resilient, and it isn't true. So resilience isn't something you're born with, it's something you've experienced, right? So that every time we take on a challenge, that's how we build our resilience. And so the idea is actually trying to shift from finding that the goal is actually achieving something, but defining the goal of actually that point of discomfort. Because that part where it's actually where you're feeling like, oh, this is really hard, right? Like maybe like when you're studying for your tests, right? And it's like, or there's a new concept and it's like, oh, I don't really get this, right? And you have that discomfort in your belly, right? In terms of what's going on. That's it's like for some people, they think that's a sign that, oh, that means that's when this is too hard, right? This is the time to give up. But it's actually that point of discomfort is a sign that your brain and body is giving you that this is the point of change. This is the point where my brain is actually shifting to be ready for this moment, right? Similarly, in terms of when we're feeling, like our heart's starting to race and we're breathing is starting to get faster. That's actually not us being, weak or like getting anxious, right? Again, that's our body and our mind actually working and getting us ready to meet that moment, right? And that's that resilient piece, right? And I think that's significant, right? And it's actually about the mindset in terms of what is my goal, what am I trying to achieve? So back to, on CP in terms of the incremental change, right? It's about actually having an idea of what that North Star is and just moving towards it, right? The goal isn't actually to get to that North Star, but all of those moments in between to getting there, right? Because we may shift in terms of what that form is, of what it means for us to have that impact, right? But if we know what that star is, we're going in that direction.
I really like that idea of taking discomfort as an indicator of something changing, sitting with that discomfort. Something like that. Thank you. All three of you, again, lead global organizations with, as I mentioned before, a strong focus on social impact. You mentioned the importance of having a sort of guiding goal, a North Star, but also not getting lost in the weeds and accepting the fact that, okay, change is, like we mentioned in the earlier panel, incremental. But still, how do you tangibly avoid burnout and maintain your passion in the long haul, right? Again, like, I guess to rephrase my question, what qualities and practices do you think are essential for sustainable leadership? And we could start with Reed at this time. With whoever makes eye contact.
Yeah. Be careful. Yeah. What was the question? It was on the values?
Yeah, the qualities of sustainable leadership. Avoiding burnout, maintaining your energy and your passion, especially within the social impact space.
So something that I always talk about with my team is that if you're in the social space and you're doing work where you're trying to impact others and make people's lives better, is not to expect anyone to be grateful to you, not to think anyone's going to come and say, you're doing a really great job, I'm so grateful, thank you for doing this. I'm like, if you do that, please don't get into social impact work. It's not the right place for you if you want validation. And because of that, I think that if you want to have sustainable, like if you want to feel no burnout, I also feel that's not going to be possible. No, okay, let me come to that. There are going to be times when you just feel like, you know what, I'm trying to work on this thing, I'm not seeing progress, or I'm not getting what I want, or like what I want to see out of this, or I'm not getting the results that I'm expecting. And I think the most important thing is to be like, it's okay to then just say like, okay, maybe I'm looking at it from a different direction and I need to maybe pivot. I need to see if there's maybe an area that I haven't actually explored fully. Like, for example, if let's say I'm doing community-based work and I've spoken to people in the community, did I apply like the proper lens? Did I apply the gender lens to it? You know, did I look from a different angle? And in terms of keeping that resilience, I think it's also to be very clear on your values and what you're trying to, like, what are you trying to, I guess, not to say achieve, but like, what do you believe in deeply? And to be like, okay, is this still where I want to be? And also to be able to take moments for self-care. I think it's very important. And what I mean by self-care is like, you don't beat yourself up about things all the time. And you must, I would say, very important is to create like a collective of people around you, a network, where you can turn to for advice, for support, words of encouragement. I feel that's so important. And that's where I have, for example, when I'm feeling extremely low in one point, I know that, okay, I have these people on dial. I can call them up. I can just say, can we just meet up for a coffee? Just need to talk about something. And they keep space for you, these people. And I would say that's so important. So building your network to have those people that you trust who are going to be telling you the truth and, you know, and also helping you to be kind to yourself, because sometimes they see it from an angle which you cannot. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes having that distance is useful. Being able to
Third
pull back.
party,
Yeah.
third party is the best. I give the best advice when I'm not. I'm the best advisor when it's not me.
Yeah, best therapist, everything. Is that how about you?
So, I mean, actually agree with everything you said. I actually think so I'm going to just expand a little bit from the perspective of someone who is a student right now, right? So I think there's a couple of things. One is so one of the things that we don't talk about enough is how lonely leadership actually is, right? Yeah. So what ends up happening is when you're in the leadership spot, if you will, right? Whether you're running a division or running an organization or a company or a country for that matter, you don't have the benefit of saying, oh, well, here are all the reasons why I couldn't get things done. Just, that's not available to you. Everybody else in the organization say, well, here are all the external factors that I have to deal with. I don't get the benefit of any of that. And nor do I get to say, gee, these are doubts that I'm starting to have about things that we're starting to do. Because the minute you start to say that you start to feel doubts, that gets magnified through the organization, right? And so the loneliness in that, and I think we don't see it because everybody's paying attention to this person all the time. When you're in leadership role, everybody gets the attention. When you walk into a room, you know, and I have to be taller and louder, and so I get attention all the time anyway. But like, you know, it's the assumption is that I have community, right? And so one of the beautiful things about where you are right now in your lives, the ages that you are, and Amar was referring to this in his own talk, is that you have a chance now to build relationships with people that will be rising through their careers in comparable ways, that we're making decisions in some comparable ways, right? So one of the things that you when you go to the top schools in the world, which all of you do, is that the minute you land on campus, they are telling you, we expect you to be the next generation's leadership bench, right? And unless you're a psychopath, when you're 17 or 18 years old, you really shouldn't, you should be like, hold on a minute, me? That's what you should be saying, right? Right? Now, if you say yes, of course, then we would love. But like, you know, but what ends up happening, and I think you're a junior now, right? So you're probably starting to feel it a little bit, which is that by the time you graduate, you start to believe it, right? You start to say, well, you know what, actually, and because you're in these classes, and people are talking about global problems, and you're learning these frameworks, and you can see how these frameworks don't exist in the world out there. You're like, wait a minute, I should be solving them. I should be the leader, right? That's what you should be saying by the end of your 4 years or however long your graduate school is. But what also is happening is that your peers are also thinking the same thing. And what ends up happening is when you start to believe, and I think Amar said nicely, you belong in the room, right? I think the reason that Axiom is so hard at getting all of you into these rooms is because I know the corridors of power are paved through these halls, right? And so you belong here, but also with that comes a concomitant obligation. And so while you are here, it is so important for you to build relationships with the other people that are also here in this room, right? Because when you are in those positions of leadership, you know, and I think you said it well, you desperately need people outside the room who understand where you came from and understand what you're trying to do and can give you that honest perspective, but also say, you know, like I think actually sometimes, you know, there's just so many challenges all the time where every once in a while you just need somebody to say, what you're doing is amazing, right? Like you've accomplished all these things and it's worth it to get up in the morning and get up and do it again, right? And so if there's anything you do, I think that sense of community is really important. I think one of the other things that tends to happen with high performing individuals, as all of you are, is that, and this is especially true of this generation, it's become so incredibly difficult to get into the top colleges right now, right? And what ends up happening is you're constantly driven. And every time you look around, you're surrounded by these super talented people and they're all driven. And you always feel like you need to be working or doing something. And what we have forgotten to do, which is crucially important, is you need to identify the things that give you joy, right? And that gets lost in the race to be successful, the race to be the next MD, CEO, whatever it is, right? Like all that gets lost. And so, you know, we have 3 boys, and our youngest is actually on his way to your school, and I'm realizing this is one thing that we haven't done a good job with them, which is like connecting them to their inner selves. Because if you don't know how to find joy, if you don't know what your happy place is, so to speak, right, then it's going to be really hard. Because one thing I can promise you 2 things. One is you're not going to be hungry, okay? Now because you've made it that far, right? But the other thing I can promise you is there are going to be days, weeks, months, maybe even years or decades where it is going to be very hard. Right? And unless you have a happy place, whether that's you're a singer, whether, you know, I know exactly what my happy place is. My happy place is on the basketball court, leading a fast break where the people in front of me are scared to death because they don't know what I'm going to do. Right? That's where I do it. Yeah. That's the combination, exactly, right? Yeah. And so, you know, and I would say it's really important. The other thing that I would say is, we spend an enormous amount of time focused on being successful at such roughly my age. We spend very little time talking about what it takes, you know, really what you want to be is on your deathbed, looking back, feeling successful, right? And I think Lansiti was kind of hinting at that. I think habits are things that are really easy to form when you do it as a community, but to decide on the habits you think are really important, right? So what does that mean? That means, like I've worked out every day for probably 40 years now, right? Just about, like sometimes I can't go on the plane or whatever, but for the most part, like that is something that I really value and I think it's kept me relatively young. And then building time in the week for those community pieces, right? So you know, we have this. We have a couple of weekly gatherings that we do with people that are kind of from different places, and it's something you have to create structure for, because otherwise we fall prey to this thing called Sundayism, right? So right, someday I'm going to go do this, or someday I'm going to, you know, and like for those of you that don't live in New York City but are here in New York City, right? If there are things that you want to do in New York City, go do them in New York City, right? Like if you you know, and one thing that I do not abide by, one thing where I'm going to differ a little bit is, you know, if there's a class that's really hard, that's going to ruin your grade, but it's like a powerful class, take the class, screw the grade. Right, like this is something where you and I disagree a little bit, right? But that's okay. Like I can understand a different perspective. But like, you know, you will not necessarily have an opportunity to do this. But also, if there's something you want to do now and you do it now, the next time you're in that same place, there's another thing that you will get to do because you have a different thing you want to do, rather than saying, same day I'll get to do it. And I'll give you one example of this, which is it's just so, you know, we were at the Shaolin Temple, right? I remember we were at the Shaolin Temple. And the reason we went to Shaolin Temple was because I was at Hasanah. We were flying to China for, I don't know, some business thing, right? And my son was reading a book on something in the Shaolin Temple. And the guy he was sitting next to, this is back when we flew business class. I don't fly business class anymore. But, you know, so like, you know, he's like sitting with some business guy. He's like, you know, Shaolin Temple, not far where we were going. So we bought a ticket, we went to Shaolin Temple, right? And so, which is just outside Zhengzhou in China. So we're going up the Shaolin Temple, and there is a place at the top of the mountain where the temple sits, where there was some guy that had some extraordinary religious experience, right? And I was there and I was like, I'm gonna go to the top, right? And the tour guide was like, he was like going with us, and the kids were fine, and they were young, but they were fine. The tour guide was like, no, there's this show at the bottom. You got to go back to the bottom. And so he convinced us before we got to the top of the stupid hill. You know, it's like, think about this, right? There's some connection to some divine universe thing at the top of the hill. You make it 3/4 of the way up, and some idiot tour guide says, no, come watch the show, right? And I never made it to the top, right? And so, and it still sits with me. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
It may have been some random, just like bench. I don't know, but I don't know.
But now you don't know.
And now I don't know,
But we
right?
should go to the top.
You know, but now I can't go to China because there's the Uyghur genocide, and I refuse to fund. I refuse to fund the Chinese economy until they get the resolved, right? So now I'm like, someday it may not happen.
Yes. Are there any like walking tours? I mean, but it wouldn't be the same, would it? It wouldn't be the same. What about you, Aisha?
Also, mental health is a really big area for me.
Yeah.
And so I talk about kind of that mental health well-being a lot. And so I guess to just go more just generally in terms of thinking about resilience and burnout. It is that there are three fundamental needs that we have, right? And these are our three fundamental psychological needs. And that's a sense of autonomy, the sense of relatedness, and the sense of competence, right? Anything where you're feeling any type of unhappiness in any way means that there's something off balance in terms of one or more of these three things, right? And so that we were talking about that sense of connectedness and having community. That's really important, right? And that connectedness, you know, yes, ideally there's somebody right next to you, right? But it doesn't actually have to be at the zero, right? And that connectedness doesn't actually have to be a person. It can actually be to nature. It can actually be to God or just some greater purpose, right? But that sense of connectedness is actually critical in terms of our well-being and our intrinsic motivation, right? And then there's that sense of autonomy, right? So that a lot of times, especially in school, you don't feel like you necessarily have the agency in terms of which class you're taking, right? Oh, it's a requirement. Columbia, right? All requirements, it feels like, right? But things that you have to do, right? And sometimes that's actually just a shift in mindset in terms of like, not just why I have to do this, but like why this is actually something that would benefit me and that I would want to do because of it, right? So that just that shift makes it so that again, it builds that resilience, right? Because it builds that, again, that sense of agency for you, right? And then that sense of competence, right? Especially so many of us, especially women, tend to feel like there's that imposter syndrome, right? It's like usually they say in terms of like women, they need to know like 110% of a topic before they can speak versus like a man's like 10% and they're already like, like, let me tell you what I think, right? So I just, you know, and that comes in different forms. It doesn't have to be in terms of, you know, based on gender, certainly by age or, you know, or where you come from, right? And just kind of, if you come from humble beginnings and it's like maybe you haven't been in a space where your voice was meant to be heard or like expected to be heard, right? And so this sense of competence, right, is something that's we need to foster in terms of, yes, the skills and knowledge that we're achieving, but it's also, again, something within ourselves, right? In terms of that, right? Like you're becoming a CEO, right? It's like feeling like, yes, I belong here, right? I belong in this role. And it's like, and the perspective perhaps of like, we're here to get it right, not to be right. And so that it's like you go with that humility and that curiosity of like how to do this and how to serve in a way that's going to be effective, right? But that also builds that sense of competence, right? And I guess the last piece of this is actually like one of my most favorite topics. Okay, no, okay, two more things.
Love.
Okay,
please go on.
One is that emotions have to, it's like going through a tunnel. It's like there's a beginning and middle and end. You have to actually get through the emotion. You can't just actually just hold onto it. You have to let it process, right? And so, and that process could be in terms of, because essentially if you don't work through whatever emotion that you're having, right, whether it is anger, frustration, sadness, anxiety, or whatever else, and you just hold on to it, it will stay stuck in your body, right? And so you actually have to have a means of letting it go. And that's critical in order to avoid this burnout, right? And so there are really basic things, right? One is just like to move, right? Essentially, if we physically move, it helps us actually work through these emotions, right? So like you have like all those like really buff like athletes where it's actually because it's like it was their anxiety that drove them and they had to like keep running, right? And then that's what made it so like they worked out all the time, right? But also sometimes it's like a really good cry, right? It just lets your body release whatever it is that you're kind of going through, right? And then these things don't have to be really big moments, right? It actually turns out that research says actually like 10, 20 seconds of you doing something for yourself to physically actually help relieve whatever stresses you're experiencing is enough, right? They learned that a lot during the pandemic when everybody was going through a lot, right? And so that actually just taking these, they're called physiological sighs, where you're taking like these double inhales and then a prolonged exhale, right? Actually lets your system just release, right? And so, and it's so simple. You like don't have to do it for like, you don't have to like do like some deep breathing exercises for like 30 minutes, right? 10 seconds, right? Like, or ideally you get like 2 minutes. Right? So I asked some of the folks I work with, it's like 2 minutes of your time that you're giving just to yourself, right? And then the last one for right now is really just around boundaries, right? I think it's really beautiful that the message here has really been that power is not power over, but power with and power for people, right, in order to serve. And turns out that the people who are able to serve the most and give the most are actually the ones who have the strongest boundaries, right? If I don't have strong boundaries, I'm not able to, I might overcommit, right? And so that I might actually overcommit and then, I'm not able to follow through, right? And it's like, it's like, yes, I'll do this. And then it's like those people that don't end up showing up because it's like there's a domino effect of all of the other commitments that they've made, right? But if you have those boundaries, then you're able to actually give more because it's like when you're giving, you're able to fully give at that time, right? But you also have those boundaries of like, this is my time with my friend where I'm going to hang out with them and actually experience those moments of joy.
Thank you so much. Just want to add something small to that. I loved everything you said. And when she mentioned about imposter syndrome, I actually went for a talk with the Columbia World Projects team, and we were talking about imposter syndrome. And one of the speakers said, like, if you walk in a room and you feel like an imposter there, like, tell me who in the room, choose someone in the room who is the legitimate person. Like, who are you the imposter? Like, who are you the imposter of? Like, who there are you saying is actually, oh, they are the real deal, I'm the imposter? Like, please pick them out and say what makes them the real deal and you not, right? Because you're in the space for a reason and you're in the room for a reason. So, like, don't let the imposter syndrome thing like be like a statement that you identify with. There's no reason to it. Just a small thing there, just for, because when she said it, I was like, oh my goodness, that's so true. So I just wanted to share it.
Oh yeah, I feel like that's such an actionable like practice of going into a room and
a space,
into any space, and when you feel like an imposter, being able to say, okay, actually, this person is great, but these are qualities that I actually share, and maybe I demonstrate them in different ways, but oftentimes we aren't as different.
And I'm here for a reason. Like, I walked into this door for a reason, so yes, just a quick one.
Thank you so much. And I'm loving the way that you guys have defined resilience thus far. I'm wondering whether you would be able to share a moment in your career where you felt either really burned out or frustrated or close to giving up, and it's these practices that you have shared with us that helped you go through that or overcome that. In particular, Dr. Aisha, I'd be so interested to hear in how the sense of autonomy that you mentioned has helped you in your career, because I find that point very interesting. Being able to say, yes, I'm doing this because I want to do this.
Does that mean I have to start?
Taking turns. I'm trying to be equitable.
I'm trying to be equitable.
All right. I guess
it doesn't have to be an instance. Yeah, just anything that.
I guess it'd be first to just disclose that there have just been lots of moments in my life where I've actually been sad, right? And I think that so that there have been just lots of difficult times, right? And I think that before I used to think that that wasn't okay, right? There's only certain emotions that were okay to have, right? But so times where life has just felt hard, I feel like I've had a lot of those, right? I think that yeah, so many. So I really can't identify except for that. I guess like one of the hard ones would be during the pandemic, where things were hard in terms of both in terms of our business as well as the nonprofit that we're working with in terms of working on that treaty to stop violence against women and girls, and also just everything else that was going on at home. Like, and there's just so much loss. Right? We had like multiple family members and friends and their family members who passed away. So like 10 people who passed away during the pandemic, and then all of these other parts. Right? And there is in that saying in terms of that with every difficulty there's relief, right? And the idea that it's not actually that after the relief, but actually within, right? It's like Maya Angelou talks about like the rainbows and the clouds, right? And it's that there is actually always in any difficulty that we have something also wonderful that's happening at that moment too. And I think that over these years of having to build the resilience, that like now I can feel that, right? Like now when it's like I'm feeling some darkness, I also know that in that darkness is when I can actually experience the light the most, right? And then also feeling like I don't have to ever do that alone, and so that I have family and loved ones, and friends, and quite frankly, I have God, right? That always keeps things in perspective for me, right? And then I guess the last part is just always doing that physical part, right? Because it's like sometimes it's hard to control the mind with the mind. So you have to start with your body in terms of like actually moving and breathing and exercising and just being in nature. Thank you so much.
I think I also have I've gone through so much like disappointments and stuff, and I think I'm someone who always feels disappointed with myself first, and that's something that I've tried to implement whenever that happens. Is I always feel like, for example, when I go and study, I have to pay for studies. Like, we pay to go to university, we pay to go for courses. So I'm like, if I make a mistake, like brackets, if I make a mistake and all that, and I'm going through whatever pain and all that, I'm like, okay, this is my payment. I'm paying for it already. I'm feeling disappointed or whatever, or I've made a mistake or whatever happens. And I'm like, if I'm paying for it, then I must learn from it. So then I don't keep wallowing in the disappointment. And I kind of bring my brain out of that thoughts and be like, I've made this mistake or whatever it is. Let's just take it as I'm paying for my education. So I take it as everything is an education. So I'm like, okay, I'm paying for it. Done. I'm going to keep paying for this now, like as if I'm keep failing this class and I keep going for it, or I can learn it once and for all and get over it. So that's something that I try to put in place mentally for myself, so that I try to make use of every single like non-wise action that is done, or like not a good feedback that
Okay, all right. So it's a big question.
Yeah.
I am aware.
It's just,
yeah, I'm just
okay.
I'm like,
So like,
it is a big question.
And they both gave all the good answers. So now I'm like, what's left? So okay, so I have a number of thoughts on this, right? So I'll just first speak to the importance of framing. Before I do that, there's an old Japanese saying, which is the strongest person is the person who gets knocked down 7 times, but gets up 8, right? And this, I think the first panel kind of talked about it a little bit. Like sometimes we're going down a path and we're so close to making it, we don't see it, and so we stop, right? And so, like
Yeah.
you poke on that thing, why don't you face that? So okay, yeah. So Pick up that scam. And I have lots of examples of people that were, people that were on the verge of bankruptcy, and then somebody came along, they bought them for hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And if they had just stopped a day earlier, they would have had zero, or vice versa, where it felt like they had something and they just decided to stop. And for us at Axiom, it actually wasn't all that long ago. It was actually about a little over a year ago, where the guy that I had asked to be in charge of our finances just missed completely, made a huge miss to the tune of probably what, 1.2 million, just missed it, $1.2 million, right? So I'd raised $1 million in January. We get to July, and he kept telling me we have lots of money coming in, we have clients, whatever. We get to July, he's like, I think we're out of money. I say, well, first of all, what do you mean you think? Right? This is kind of your job. What do you mean you think you're out of it? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I just thought we had, and it turns out now, ultimately, that's my responsibility, right? Like I had to put the right person in the right role, and he didn't have the skills to do it, and I should have seen what. So ultimately, this lies with me. But like, in July, we're sitting there, and we are, we have payroll coming up. It was probably like, I don't know, it was like 7 or 8 days away when he finally told me. So I'm 200 some odd $1,000 short. And I just raised $1 million, and I was building out the strategy that we were gonna, we were getting ready to take over the world kind of a thing, because what we have is genuinely world changing. I've raised money over the years from people that I consider to be close friends, right? So, now I'm like, oh my God, like 15 years out, we've built all these great things. I'm not just out of money, I'm deep in the hole. And so like, and so in that moment, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, well, should you be in this hole? In other words, should you stop, right? Like, is it just that you're not cut out for this, that this organization, enterprise, whatever, is just not going to be successful, whatever it is, right? And, and I think, I actually had some long calls, and I was like, if we're gonna raise our money and get out of this, only to fail a year or two later, let's just fail now, right? And I think understanding that it's okay to fail and that life will move on, I think that was an interesting benefit that I got, which is like I got to the point where I accepted the possibility that I had just burned the 15 most important years of my career in terms of making money and being successful, all this other stuff, right? And I am someone who's historically not failed, right? And so that was one thing. And so then the second thing that I think we sort of said to ourselves was, well, do we have something, right? And if we have something, is it worth fighting for? And if it's worth fighting for, what does that look like? And it was several days of sitting with the team and saying, look, is what we have real, right? And if what we have is real, do we have an obligation to continue to try and make it work? Because if we stop now, the things that we built will no longer exist, right? Essentially will die. And so obviously the answer was, we said yes, right? And I called a friend of mine who sold his company for $1.275 billion a couple of years ago. So, and I've never asked him for money. I knew him when he was poor, right? And so I've seen him make all this money. And the reason I didn't ask him for money is because everybody looks at him as a walking checkbook, right? And I know him as something much more than that. I've never wanted, but I was like, look, I need you to bail me out, right? I need you to write me a check for $200,000. I don't know what to pay you back, just don't pay you back, right? And so he did, and it's a funny thing because sometimes when you just by sheer force of will, and Aisha's often guilty of this, where she will make something that shouldn't work, she'll make it work. She will she's just so determined, right? And I'd like to think I'm determined as well, but and sometimes what ends up happening is when you find yourself compensating for something that actually should be broken, sometimes you got to let it break, right? And so what this did was it allowed us to sort of step back and say, actually, we're not doing this right, right? And the reason we're in this hole is because there was something that we should have seen that wasn't working, but we didn't want to believe it. Because we didn't want to believe it, we kept trying to fix it, right? And what that's allowed us to do over the last year is it's allowed us to reshape the organization to focus on the areas where we have the greatest impact, including scholars and having more scholars come through, but also like focusing on the kids that we can help the most, and then accepting that that money matters, right? And I think one of the things that was really interesting for me when I was at Hasanah, for those of you that are kind of the Muslim religious tradition, we have this thing called Kifik every year. So Kifik is where, so it's like the Islamic Finance Circle. And there's this guy named Dawood Abu Bakr, he's a scholar. And he said that, religiously, we often get it wrong, right? So to the extent that you buy into this perspective, right? So, God has placed in the world beautiful things, wonderful things. And what ends up happening is there's this narrative that says that if I have good or beautiful things, or I want these good and elegant and beautiful things, that I'm somehow being selfish. But that's not actually the correct perspective. The correct perspective is to say, he's put them there for you to seek. It is both an incentive, but also it's also, it's a way to acknowledge the greatness of the divine when you interact with beautiful things, right? And it's interesting if you go back to the Medicis in Florence way back in the day, for those that are interested in art history, their core philosophy was actually, if you introduce beauty in the world, that people will behave differently because they're surrounded by beautiful things, right? And anyway, so I don't know how I got on that, but so the essence of it is, and I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is that's why it's important to have people around you that are not going to tell you what you want to hear, but are actually going to tell you what they're seeing and hearing in a very honest clinical perspective. Because in those moments, in the deepest, darkest corners of the night, when it's just you and your thoughts, you've got to be honest with yourself, right? And not tell yourself what you want to hear. And we're on our way now, right? We are actually, thankfully, just so you know, we're not going anywhere. So we can continue this knowledge. But it was because of this difficult moment that we are now in a much better place than we would have been had we not been, right? It's hard in the moment to think about, because I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was like, oh man, all these people screwed me, and it was all, and I was just like, and I was just blaming everybody else, but like in that moment, it saved us. You could argue, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. So
I can't overstate the value that you guys have brought to the panel today. Like, I want to thank you so much, not just for being so vulnerable with us today, but also for making the time to share so much with us. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure all of our viewers really appreciate it too.
Are you doing the local time check thing?
I'm wondering. I'd love to open some space if anybody has any questions for our speaker, or if there are any questions online. Because I selfishly have some questions, but.
Everyone's scared to make eye contact because you made that statement.
Yeah. They're averting their gaze. Yeah. I have a little bit of a more technical question. Let's extrapolate these lessons to a broader picture. I'm speaking from my own limited experience in community organizing. I've seen how difficult it can be to unite different stakeholders, and stakeholders is a very broad term, but whether that's different parts of one community or different communities or state agencies or firms, sometimes it can be really difficult to unite different people to a common goal, and to a common solution to a problem. But oftentimes it feels like that unity is crucial for sustainable change. All three of you have experience in sort of leading these cross-sector initiatives. And I was wondering, okay, this is a really technical question, but how do you guys see, public, private, nonprofit sectors working together for sustainable development? And how do you see your role?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I answer the question. How do the different kind of interest groups in society, so government entities, private firms, and NGOs, civil society. Okay, that's a good question. Very big question.
It is a very big
Thinking maybe you should
question.
know these questions first earlier.
Perhaps I should have. For the next panel. Right, guys? Yeah. Ooh, okay. Looks like we have a question from online as well, if you guys want to think about that answer a little longer.
Well, so I have an answer to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Please enlighten us.
It's a slightly longer answer, but I'll speak to it just from my own experience. So because I think the answer is different depending on who you are and where you come from. So I mentioned earlier that I grew up from kind of very humble background, and so I went to law school at Harvard, and I did I did a bunch of Harvard law things, and then I started my own negotiation training consulting groups. That's what I taught when I was at Harvard. And as part of this, so we were starting to get some traction. It took a while to figure out how to run a business and that kind of thing. And I remember I was in this place called Fulton, Missouri. Anybody been to Fulton, Missouri?
No.
Yeah, there's no reason to go. So I shouldn't say that. The people there were lovely, but so Fulton, Missouri, it was this vitamin supplement company that brought me out, right? And so what happened, I kid you not, what happened in Fulton is there was this pond. And so they decided to make a resort out of it. So they built a bunch of cabins around it. But really the pond was just, it rained a lot one year and it just didn't dry. And so they decided to build a bunch of, it's like credit to the entrepreneurial ingenuity, but like the cabins were nasty, right? Like mosquitoes and, so I'd gone to get dinner and come back and so I was sitting in the car and I just didn't want to go in the cabin because it was just, and I was going through this thing where I was like, why am I doing this, right? So I'm making money for the first time in my life, really. And I'm good at what I do. I'd like to think I was the best in the world at what I did because that was why I did it. But like, there's something missing. And so what happened was I was reading the Analects of Confucius at the time. So there was a story that Confucius told his students. So should I tell you the story? Is that interesting? Do you have time for this? Yeah. Okay. All right. So, do we have time? I'll look at the timekeeper. Do we have time for this? Do we have time for this story? All right. So Confucius says to his students, "Shall I tell you a story?" And they said, "Yes, master. Please tell us the story." And so he said there was a traveler in China that was traveling throughout China, and he was going to, just kind of, the mountains, the rural areas of China. And one time when he's in the mountains of China, he comes upon a family that had a secret that they had held in their generations. And the secret was they knew how to take silver and make an alloy, a chemical mixture out of it, where the silver was stronger than it was by silver by itself, but also more malleable. And what they did with this knowledge is they would make handicrafts, trinkets, right? And that's how they would make their living. They would sell the handicrafts in their store. And so this traveler sees this and he goes to the family. He says, "Look, if I promise not to compete with you, will you sell me your knowledge?" Right? And the family said, hold on a minute. This has been our family for generations. It's our livelihood. We can't just, we don't know you. And the traveler said, "I understand your dilemma, and I'll come back in the morning for your answer." That night, there's a raging debate between the family where he'd offered like $100, let's call it dollars, whatever, right? Where half the family said, "Look, we don't know this guy. How can we trust him? It's our livelihood. We can't put it at risk. He could set up a shop right next door." The other half of the family said, "Look, we could use the $100. And we've just been getting by." And so the nature of knowledge, of course, is if one person's going to sell it, you always may as well sell it because once it's sold, it's gone. So the traveler comes back in the morning, they sell him their secret, he keeps his word and he moves on. And then in his travels, he gets to the Emperor of China. And he says to the Emperor of China, "I have knowledge that will give you a competitive advantage on the battlefield." Right? And so the Emperor says, "Fine, you go and you take this knowledge." And I looked at a map later, it was Inner Mongolia, so it's probably the Huns or some version of a raiding group. So he takes this knowledge and he makes armor and swords and shields and things like that, right? And so they get raided, and it's the armor that carries the day. Mm-hmm. And the emperor is so grateful to this man that he makes him governor of the region. And now Confucius turns to students and he says, "So why have I told you this story?" Any thoughts? Have you heard this story?
You have.
Yeah, you've heard the story. I tell this story a lot. Right. So remember where I am. I'm sitting in a rental car in Fulton, Missouri, around a so-called pond, which is rain that had just never dried, right? So I'm going through this moment of like, why am I doing this kind of a thing, right? Because it's got to be more than money. So any thoughts? It's a very quiet group, I noticed.
Yeah.
So.
I thought it's also linked to something paradoxes.
Say more?
Paradoxes.
Yeah, what do you mean by paradoxes?
you ask an existential question at the same time. You exist to serve a purpose.
Yeah, no, so that's a good way to think about it. So what Confucius was actually doing is he was saying good stories, it's time to go, right? I've taught you what I've taught you, but what you should do as an individual is to ask yourself, what are your unique attributes, privileges, characteristics, and find the place where you're going to have the greatest impact. Because the knowledge was not new. The knowledge existed for generations. What this traveler had done is he had taken the knowledge from point of what we would argue is suboptimal impact and taken it to the point of maximum impact, right? And so I think that's why the public-private nonprofit conversation is actually a very difficult one because it depends on who you are and what your kind of innate traits are. And one thing I'll say about Malaysia, one thing I actually love, and I love the fact there's so many women in this room in particular, is that as a community of women, it may be, if it's not the most empowered group of women in the world, boy, it's got to be close in Malaysia, right? And you have women as CEOs, as ministers, as judges, the whole thing, right? And I remember, I was in KL once, and there's this woman on a motorbike with a dudong and the helmet, and she's like flipping off drivers left, right, and center. She didn't care, right? And it's just like, and nobody batted their eye, right? Like you wouldn't even see that in the States, you wouldn't see that in Europe, right? It's just like, and there's something about like just it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so there are opportunities that are available that may not be available in other places, right? That would be harder in certain other parts of the world. And so I think, to kind of understand what is it that you know, who is it that you know, and what is it that kind of gets you out in the morning that you can be passionate about, that you can get knocked down 7 times and get back up 8, and then find the place that's going to do that. And I would also say, you don't need to know what that is now, right? Like, one of the things I wish somebody had just said to me early on, right now, when you're young, and most of you are going to go back to Hasanah, which is great because Hasanah has so many different ways in which you can serve, so many different types of companies, so many different sectors, and which is of all the scholars, I think you're the most lucky because you have that diversity of options later on. But to kind of give yourself permission to say, I don't know exactly what that thing is for me yet, and if you know other people that do, that's lucky. It's very unusual for someone that's young to know that. But I'll just say, like, if somebody had said to me, when you're really young and you're talented, you feel like when you're making a choice, you're saying no to lots of other things, right? And that's really, really hard because it all sounds super exciting and sexy and interesting. And what I now know, and what I tell my own kids, and I now say to you, which is, there are actually very few people in the world that are really good at getting stuff done. Just there aren't that many, right? There are lots of, Harvard and Cornell and Columbia grads. Most of them, they do okay. They probably make money for themselves, but like truly impactful people are actually really hard to come by. And what you don't realize is that whatever you do, if you're successful, then you have lots more opportunity on their sides, but at a higher level, right? Because people are always looking for people that can get things done, right? And so just pick, and it's okay. Whatever you pick, just pick. And then I'll tell you something that Sir John Bond told me. You know Sir John, right? You know Sir John. So do people know who John Bond is? You're all too young, probably too young to know. John Bond was the former CEO and chairman of HSBC, and he started as in the mailroom at HSBC, right? So he rose pretty quickly. And so when I was at Hasanah, I was in Shenzhen with Sir John, and we're just going around a bus looking at all these different companies to potentially invest in. And at this point, he's kind of on the tail end of his career, and he's on the verge of retirement. But I was like, I'm sitting next to Sir John Bond. I should ask him some things, right? And so I said, so how'd you do it? How'd you go from the mailroom to be CEO and chairman? And what he said, I thought was just so simple and so profound. He said, well, I didn't set out to be chairman. I started in the mailroom, right? But when I was in the mailroom, what I said was, this is my job in the mailroom, and I'm going to do this job as good as I can possibly do it. And people saw that. And then they gave me another role. And then whatever that was my job. And whatever my job is, I'm going to do this job as well as I can. And that mindset helped him rise the organization very quickly. I'm not sure we could do that today. I think we've become much more elitist in our bigger organizations. But you don't have to worry about that because you guys are coming in on the right side of that coin, right? But I think sometimes, forgive me, I think self-care is important. I really do. I honestly do. But like when you're 20 something, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, honestly, what you should be doing is you should be working really hard.
I agree with you.
Right.
Like, because I'm saying it like,
way over 20 years ago. That's why I can say Southampton. When I was 20 plus,
Yeah.
we just 3-4 jobs, you just work.
Put your head down.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when you do good, that we had this saying at Hasanah, I don't know if they still had it when you were there, but the saying used to be the reward for good work is more good work. Right? Meaning if you did the reason when you read my bio, the reason I had so many portfolio, I started with one. And then, when Tatsu would look around and say, I need somebody to do this thing, it just, they just kept adding stuff to my list, right? Not to say that I was good, but I wasn't bad. And so, but the beauty of that is that's opportunity, right? And then, so when you do good work, people will see it because there are so few people that actually do the work, right? So if you have to stay late and get something done, so what? Stay late and get it done, right? And it's a privilege, right? It's a privilege to get to do the things that all of you will get to do, right? And so to acknowledge that and to honor that by putting in the effort. And then the benefit of that is when you do that work, you will get more opportunity, you get promoted faster, right? Because what you realize is that it's not about how much time you spend doing something, it's about how well you do it, right? And so, so I would embrace the opportunity that is in front of you, right? And what's funny is the hardest working people in the organization are the people that are most senior, right? Nobody talks about that. So what do you think happens at 9 o'clock at night when they're walking around still working and you're the only young person? What do you think happens, right? They say, well, I know Charisma. I saw her working. She's really smart. We need somebody for this thing. Let's have her do this thing, right? And then that's what happens, right? People at the end of the day, organizations are made up of human beings. So don't be afraid to be the person that gets stuff done, right? In fact, embrace it.
I think that story from Confucius is a perfect place to end because something that we hear all the time as Hasanah scholars is that the scholarship isn't given to us, but through us. And I really want to thank you guys again for, giving us so many actionable tips on how to be giving that knowledge through us in a sustainable and actually resilient way. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of.
I know. Yeah. Next time, I'll email you guys. Yes, but you guys did so amazing off the cuff.
That was fun. Thank you for having us.
Can you take a picture?
Yes, I'd love to.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. All right. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Outstanding. That was very.
Oh,
great.
Well
Yes. Yes. Yes.
just before we end, we have all the speakers and the moderators up on stage for a quick picture. Okay. Yeah, we're from both sides.
Each record us.
Nanti kejap lagi ada kita sekali. Okay.
No, you had a nice height. It was very nice.
I was like, okay.
Okay. Zafra kena get it closer. Okay. Zafra tolak sikit the chair. Okay, alright, cool. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I know the dollar store. Let's see the dollar store. Yes, I think I
Oh, okay. One final thing, everybody. There's a QR code, so if you guys could quickly scan this and fill up with some feedback from the event, that'd be really helpful to our team at Khazanah. I say it like it's about Khazanah.
Our team.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. Now we'll proceed to the networking session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
how do you like the event?
Oh, look at me with speaking like